Trust me, students, you do not want to mismanage your time. You'll end up like my great-great-uncle Angus Ferguson. He was a charming fellow, but he was always wasting his time on trivial frivolities. He would often say things like,
"Blimey! I've gone and wasted all me time on cricket and footy. I've no time left for me studies."
Needless to say, Angus never quite hit his stride. If you do not recognize your emotions for what they are, you'll end up like my great-great-uncle Angus Ferguson. He was a charming fellow, but he had a nasty temper. He would often say things like,
"Codswallop! What do you mean you're out of me favourite tea and crumpets? This is the worst day of me life."
Needless to say, Angus could be a bit of a monster when he lost his temper. We do not abide by the golden rule. I'm afraid you'll end up like my great-great-uncle Angus Ferguson. He was a charming fellow, but he had a tendency to treat others dreadfully. He would often say things like,
"Now you listen here, you filthy mongrel. You can't have the last bite of me pudding, and that's that."
Needless to say, more often than not, Angus abided by the Angus rule instead of the golden rule. If you don't keep your promises, you'll end up like my great-great-uncle Angus Ferguson. He was a charming man by all accounts, had so much potential, but he never kept his promises. Since no one could trust him, he ended up all alone with no one for company except his 23 cats.
"Blimey! I've gone and broken all me promises. Now the only one who trusts me is Mr. Whiskers."
I assure you, you do not want your only trusted confidant to be a feline friend. You'll end up like my great-great-uncle Angus Ferguson. He could be a charming fellow, but he could also be quite the uncivilized brute. He would often say things like,
"Now you listen here, you cotton-headed ninny-muggin. I know I'm right, and I don't care what you've got to say."
Needless to say, Angus never made many human friends at university. You'll end up like my great-great-uncle Angus Ferguson. He could be a charming fellow, but he would often say things like,
"Blimey! I reckon I've got a whole world figured out. I know all there is to know."
Needless to say, Angus never learned much after that, and he became rather dull.